In this tutorial, we'll migrate from a legacy on-prem Siteminder install to the cloud using Okta. We'll use AtricoreIO to create and configure the necessary components and orchestrate user migration. Our approach is non-disruptive, with users migrated gradually from Siteminder to Okta with no disruption to normal business operation. We open Siteminder's administrator console and access the current realm. In the Real View section, we can check which authentication scheme is currently configured. In our case, it's using the example. Now we can go to the authentication scheme's definitions list and check for that particular entry. We can see that the example authentication scheme already configured inside Siteminder is actually using HTML for authentication, which means that Siteminder is using basic authentication. Now we'll access the example application configuring Siteminder. It's an ERP system, and Siteminder will handle the authentication process. As you can see, Siteminder's login screen is presented when trying to access the system. And there we have it. We've successfully accessed the application as an admin. This is the user for this tutorial. As we stated at the beginning of this tutorial, the goal is to gradually replace Siteminder with Okta, and for that we'll need an Okta account. Let's take a look at our dashboard. As you can see, the only one in the directory is the account owner. In our example, AtricoreIO will provision users into Okta incrementally. We'll see this in action later. Now we'll use AtricoreIO to orchestrate changes in the existing deployment. The goal is to allow users to access the ERP system using Okta's authentication service. For opening the designer, the first thing you'll see is a dashboard with all the existing projects. We'll create a new one for this tutorial. Let's name it Contoso, since this is the name of the company in our example. Now we'll tell AtricoreIO to discover the different components in our infrastructure. Now the process is surveying Siteminder to identify key components. Once completed, we'll see a set of elements in our project that represent everything that was discovered. Now let's arrange the model a little. As you can see, this process discovered several elements. One is Siteminder's identity provider. We can see server properties like port, etc. One is a user's repository. And the third interesting one is the ERP application. Now we need to incorporate Okta information into our model. Just like before, we'll use the import process to discover our Okta operation details. Once this process is completed, all the relevant elements will appear in our current model, so we can use them to make the necessary changes. The first thing we'll do is to tell AtricoreIO that our ERP system should trust Okta for authentication. Let's create a connection between the two elements. We'll connect the ERP service provider endpoint with the IDP endpoint on the Okta element. The last step is to add a new identity synchronization element to the model. It will contain the necessary information to migrate users from Siteminder to Okta. In particular, we'll define a set of mapping rules used during the migration process. We'll map Siteminder user attributes to Okta. In our example, we need to map the user's email, first name, and the last name. Now that we've finished modifying our model, we're ready to impact our infrastructure. We'll use the export process to tell AtricoreIO that changes need to be applied. This will modify the state of our solution, including Siteminder and Okta configuration, and of course the attribute operator. Let's take a look at the changes. Let's go back to Siteminder's administration console and take a look at the authentication schemes. We can see that there's a new entry. The scheme was created by AtricoreIO. And if you look, you can verify that the newly created authentication scheme is now being used. This is part of the identity orchestration process. If we go to Okta's administration console, we'll see that a new application was also created. This represents the trust relationship between our ERP and Okta's IDP. If we take a look at the directory, we can see that no users have been migrated yet. That will happen later. Now let's try to access the application. Notice that AtricoreIO is now orchestrating the identity process. In our example, users can choose to log in either with Okta or Siteminder, but this behavior can be modified from the designer. Using Siteminder credentials, as I mentioned before, since during the authentication process, AtricoreIO is triggering an event that will migrate the current user to Okta. Take a look at Okta's directory. We can see that a new user was created during the authentication process. We'll end this tutorial by showcasing Okta authentication. We're now presented with the login screen. Let's choose Okta's login. Now let's provide admin user credentials, and we'll be redirected back to our ERP. Thanks for watching this no-code IAM migration tutorial. If you'd like to know more about AtricoreIO, you can book a free consultation call with an engineer, either here or back at the website. Keep in touch.